Hello, greetings from Basel in Switzerland to you all over the world who might hear and see these videoed sermons. We're having a series of sermons on the book of Malachi, the last book in the Old Testament. And his situation was that the people of Israel, the nation, had been in exile in Babylon and had returned to Israel, to Palestine. The temple had been rebuilt and the nation had been reestablished, but things were starting to deteriorate and the society was beginning to crumble in various ways. And God is very concerned to speak to the people and encourage them and instruct them through Malachi. In our situation, we are the people of God, those who believe in Jesus, and Malachi's words are very important for us so that we don't crumble as churches and families and communities. Malachi has been dealing with the religious and practical life of the nation, and now he's going to turn in chapter 2, verses 10 through 16, our passage for today, to the area of family life in the nation and the importance of that. He begins in verse 10 saying, "Have we not all one Father?" And he probably means Abraham or Jacob, Israel, because he was speaking to the people of God as a nation. Now, in the 21st century, the people of God are not a nation. We are an international community of the family of God. Then the second question is, did not one God create us? That would be an international question because God has created all people and all people should belong to him and function in his image. Why do we profane the covenant of our fathers by breaking faith with one another? Now, that concept is expanded in the first letter of John, who teaches us that we know how we relate to God by looking at how we relate to each other. So Malachi is saying we profane or we annul, we cancel, we insult the covenant, the agreement, the compact that our fathers had with God by breaking faith with each other. So we look to our relationships with each other to measure how we are actually relating to God. Verse 11, Judah has broken faith. A detestable thing has been committed in Israel. So he's speaking of the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom, the whole people of God all together. A detestable thing has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. Judah, it means the whole people of God, has desecrated the sanctuary, the meeting place with God, has desecrated the sanctuary the Lord loves, and now our meeting place with God is Jesus. And he means that we insult Jesus by marrying the daughter of a foreign god. Now, we could also read son of a foreign god. Now, that doesn't mean that they marry a foreigner, which was commonly done. Even at the Exodus, a lot of Egyptians went with the Israelites and presumably were intermarried with them. So the problem is not marrying someone of another country or another tradition or another culture or another race. The problem is marrying someone who worships another god, who might worship themselves or success or pleasure or privacy or power or convenience. So when we choose a marriage partner, we need to be careful to choose someone who worships the God that we worship and not a humanistic God of some form of selfishness. And this is what the Israelites had done in the time of Malachi. They had married people who were either foreigners or not foreigners, who worshipped various gods of convenience and self-centeredness. When we do this, we increase the fact that the world is the salt and the light of the church. When we bring into our Christian communities and families people who have a very different worldview. Verse 12, as for the man who does this, whoever he may be, high, low, rich or poor, famous or obscure, may the Lord cut him off from the tents of Jacob, even though he brings offerings to the Lord Almighty. This is quite a violent prayer. He wants God to remove the bad example from the people of God, so that the people of God are not led astray, even though he brings offerings to the Lord Almighty, even though he is religiously correct, even though he contributes financially and in other ways to the well-being of the community or the church or the nation, may he be cut off if he connects himself strongly, particularly by marriage, to people who have a very different worldview of humanism or power or some other kind of worldview that is not the worldview of the Bible. Verse 13, he writes, another thing you do, you flood the Lord's altar with tears. You weep and wail because he no longer pays attention to your offerings or accepts them with pleasure from your hands. He's talking about ungodly sorrow, selfish sorrow. Godly sorrow is being sorry about the things that make God sorry and sympathizing with him. Ungodly sorrow is being sorry because I broke my leg, or my dog died, or my mortgage is increased, or my rent control is canceled. It's being sorry about the circumstances of my life and the things that have happened to me that I would like to get improved. This is not godly sorrow. And Malachi says that the people come with an ungodly sorrow and they weep and wail because they don't get relief from God. God does not help them or correct the situation that is uncomfortable for them. And remember that Malachi's chief concern in this passage is our relationship with each other, and particularly marriage. We become distant from God if we are distant from each other. But ungodly sorrow is about myself and not about the things that matter to God most, like relationships, loving and serving and being faithful to each other. Verse 14, you ask why. Why doesn't God answer my prayers? Why doesn't God bless my family, my business, my church, my community? It is because the Lord is acting as the witness between you and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith or trust with her, although she is your partner or companion, the wife of your marriage covenant. Marriage is central to the teaching of Malachi and the teaching of the whole Bible, because in true life, we are married to God. The Israelite nation was called the wife of God. And there are many prophecies concerning how Israel has been an unfaithful wife. In the New Testament, we are the bride of Christ. He is our husband, which is a little bit difficult to accept, especially for men, because in relationship to Jesus, we are all feminine. We are all his wife, and we are our husband. This is the big, eternal, central fact of life. And if we don't live out that reality of faithful marriage and trust and companionship and protection in our lives in space and time on the earth, then we destroy everything and we make ourselves out of focus with who God is and what he wants and what he has prepared and promised for us. We are in the image of God, and God is three persons in community with faithfulness and communication among the persons of God. So when we are in his image, the image of God is them, not him or her, and we need to pay special attention to our relationships and our community in order to be who God made us to be. So God is acting as a witness between these men, or these women, I would say, and the wife of your youth, because you have broken faith with her, though she is your partner, companion, the wife of your marriage covenant. So he's talking about a breakdown of trust. And in this time, in 2020, where we have the corona, the COVID virus pandemic on the earth, one of the most serious and damaging effects of the pandemic and people's ways of trying to cope with it is the deterioration of trust. Less and less people trust their governments or the media or the scientists or the medical people or each other. Family violence is increasing, divorce is increasing. So the stress, the pressure is attacking our capacity to trust. Trust is essential for life. Trust in God, trust in each other. And we complain that there is a lack of trust, but there's something we can do about it. We can actually behave in trustworthy ways. We can be careful, particularly about our language, that we say what we mean and mean what we say, and are faithful to that. We can put as a very high priority being dependable, being faithful, and learning to trust each other. This is a way of fighting evil. This is a way of taking a stand and fighting in the Lord's army for life and against death. Then in verse 15, he writes, "Has not the Lord made them one?" This is the married couple. "In flesh and spirit, in body and in breath, in intention, they are his." They belong to God. And why one? Because God was seeking godly offspring. He wants people to have healthy children who grow in stable, healthy ways because the marriage of their parents is healthy and stable. And we have seen in recent decades, with the breakdown of marriage and the increase of divorce and unfaithfulness, that children really suffer and have increasing psychological problems and become antisocial in various ways. And it's because they don't have a stable marriage of their parents to support them in their growing. So guard yourself and do not break faith with the wife of your youth. See, Malachi's and God's central concern is marriage. And it is assumed in this passage and in the whole Bible that marriage is between a man and a woman and not any other sort of arrangement that we might think of. Then in verse 16, he writes, "I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel, and I hate a man's covering himself with violence as well as with his garment." Now, I'd like to read to you from the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 19, the teaching of Jesus on this subject. Matthew chapter 19, starting at verse 3. Some Pharisees came to him to test him. They asked, "Is it lawful for a man to divorce his wife for any and every reason?" "Haven't you read," he replied, "that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female?" So Jesus, whenever he talks about marriage, goes back to the creation account, God's original intention, because Jesus wants us to return to that and be faithful and stable in God's original intention. Haven't you read that at the beginning the Creator made them male and female and said, for this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and the two will become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one. Therefore, what God has joined together, let man not separate. Why then, they asked, did Moses command that a man give his wife a certificate of divorce and send her away? Jesus replied, Moses permitted you to divorce your wives because your hearts were hard. But it was not this way from the beginning. I tell you that anyone who divorces his wife, except for marital unfaithfulness, and marries another woman, commits adultery. The marital unfaithfulness, sleeping with someone who is not your marriage partner, kills a marriage. And then in other teaching in the New Testament, we find that the person who did not kill the marriage has a choice. They can either say, let the marriage stay dead, it's hopeless, or they can say, let's try to bring it back to life. But the person who killed the marriage does not have a choice. The disciples said to him, if this is the situation between husband and wife, it is better not to marry. And this is generally what our Western cultures are saying in these days. It is better not to marry because marriage is too complicated and too committed and too difficult to maintain. So it's better just not to have it, and then our lives will be easier and more convenient and more flexible. So this isn't only about life 2,000 years ago, it's very postmodern. It's very now what it's talking about. Jesus replied, not everyone can accept this word, the word about being married and being faithful, but only those to whom it has been given. In a fallen world, it is a gift to be able to be married. For some are eunuchs, they are not married. They don't have a sexual relationship with someone else because they were born that way, handicapped. Others were made that way by men because they have been damaged in various ways, physical and psychological. And others have renounced marriage because of the kingdom of heaven, because they find it impossible to have a marriage in their situation. The one who can accept this should accept it, which means that if you have the possibility of being married, you shouldn't say no. Now, it has to be a godly marriage, a reasonable marriage. You have to marry someone who does not worship some other god. But if you have the possibility of marriage, it is God's original intention for human life, and you shouldn't avoid it for convenience or because you are afraid of it or because you don't trust God to sustain you in the great project of being married. I hate divorce, says the Lord God of Israel. And I hate a man's covering himself with violence as well as with his garment. So he's connecting divorce with violence. A man who hates and divorces does violence to the one that he should protect. And he does violence to God's will and intention for human life. So guard yourself and do not break faith. That is the main message. Our God is a faithful God and the foundation of all faithfulness. We cannot be faithful to Him without being faithful to each other. Always look to Jesus and trust Him to give you strength, wisdom, and creativity for being faithful. God bless you.